The world is changing, and America's influence isn't what it used to be. More and more countries are redefining their priorities and stepping away from long-standing alliances. Nations are seeking alternatives to the US dollar, expanding their trade networks, and taking a more independent approach to defense and diplomacy. Once reliable partners are now focusing on self-sufficiency, regional cooperation, and new economic models. As this transformation develops, one big question remains: what does it mean for America's role on the world stage? Today, we are looking at the 10 countries America is losing influence over and why. So don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss more videos like these. 10. Germany. Germany has long been a close ally of the United States, but that relationship has been shifting in recent years. Many Germans feel that America isn't as reliable as it used to be, and that has led to a push for greater independence, especially when it comes to defense. With tensions rising in Europe, Germany is increasingly looking to strengthen its own military rather than relying on US protection. At the same time, economic disagreements have also created distance. The US has pressured Germany over its trade surplus and policies regarding China, but Germany isn't backing down. Another factor is energy. After years of depending on Russian gas, Germany has been working hard to secure new energy sources. While the US has supplied liquefied natural gas, Germany has also been striking deals with other countries, reducing its dependence on American energy. Politically, German leaders have become more vocal in criticizing US policies, whether it's about climate change, global trade, or military interventions. Many Germans see the US as unpredictable, making them hesitant to align too closely. Public opinion surveys show that Germans are becoming more skeptical of American leadership. The US is no longer the automatic leader in Germany's eyes. 9. Turkey. For decades, Turkey has been a key US ally, especially as a NATO member, but the relationship has grown tense. One of the biggest issues is Turkey's balancing act between the West and other global powers like Russia and China. While the US expects its allies to stand firmly against these rivals, Turkey has chosen a more independent path. It has purchased advanced weapons from Russia, despite strong American opposition. That move led to the US imposing sanctions, deepening the divide. On top of that, Turkey's leaders have taken an increasingly nationalist approach, making decisions that don't always align with US interests. Economic factors also play a role. The US and Turkey have clashed over trade policies and sanctions, leading to financial instability that has hurt Turkey's economy. Instead of turning to the US for help, Turkey has looked elsewhere, deepening economic partnerships with China and the Gulf states. Anti-American sentiment has been growing in Turkey, fueled by historical grievances and recent political disputes. Many Turks believe the US hasn't been a fair or loyal partner. While Turkey remains in NATO, its loyalty to the alliance is increasingly questioned, and its willingness to cooperate with the US is more conditional than ever. 8. Vietnam. Vietnam's relationship with the US has come a long way since the war, turning into an important economic and strategic partnership. But despite these improvements, Vietnam is also making moves that reduce America's influence. One of the biggest factors is Vietnam's deepening ties with China. Vietnam relies heavily on China for trade, manufacturing, and regional stability. The US has been trying to counter China's influence in Southeast Asia, but Vietnam is carefully playing both sides, making sure it doesn't depend too much on the United States. At the same time, Vietnam has been strengthening ties with other major powers, including Russia, India, and European nations. It wants to keep its options open rather than aligning too closely with the US. Another reason for the shift is trust. Vietnam remains cautious about US foreign policy. Many Vietnamese officials worry that Washington's commitments in the region could change depending on politics in the US itself. Trade disagreements have also played a role. American policies on tariffs, regulations, and supply chains have sometimes frustrated Vietnamese leaders, and Vietnam is making it clear that it won't be a pawn in America's global strategy. 7. Brazil. Brazil has often been seen as a natural partner for the US in South America, but in recent years, it has been charting its own path. One major shift is Brazil's growing economic and political ties with China. China is now Brazil's largest trading partner, and the two countries have deepened their cooperation in key industries like agriculture, energy, and technology. At the same time, Brazil is playing a bigger role in global diplomacy. It is leading efforts to create alternative international alliances that are less dependent on the United States. Politically, Brazilian leaders have become more vocal about asserting their independence. While past governments leaned closely toward Washington, recent administrations have emphasized Brazil's sovereignty, resisting US influence on issues like climate change, trade, and regional politics. The Amazon rainforest is another sticking point. The The US has pressured Brazil to take stronger action on deforestation, but many Brazilians see this as interference in their domestic affairs. Public opinion in Brazil also reflects this shift. While the US remains popular in some circles, many Brazilians view American policies as self-serving rather than mutually beneficial. The result is a Brazil that is far less friendly than before. 6. France. The US and France have a long and complicated relationship, and France has been distancing itself in several key areas. One of the biggest reasons is France's desire for European independence. French leaders have been pushing for Europe to rely less on the US, especially when it comes to defense. This idea, sometimes called strategic autonomy, is gaining traction in Europe, and France is leading the charge. Instead of depending on American military support, France wants Europe to strengthen its own security. Economically, France has also been moving in a different direction. While trade with the US remains strong, France is pushing for greater economic independence, especially in industries like technology and energy. It has also been more willing to challenge US policies on global trade, sometimes siding with the European Union over Washington. Another major factor is diplomacy. French leaders have criticized US foreign policy decisions and have shown a willingness to go their own way. Public sentiment in France also plays a role. Many French citizens are skeptical of American leadership, and past disagreements have left a lasting impact. While France and the US will remain allies, France is making it clear that it won't simply follow America's lead. 5. Saudi Arabia. For decades, Saudi Arabia and the US had a close partnership built on oil, security, and shared regional interests. But in recent years, that relationship has changed. One of the biggest reasons is that Saudi Arabia is no longer as dependent on the US for security. The country has heavily invested in its own military and defense capabilities, reducing its reliance on American protection. It has also started buying weapons from other countries, including Russia and China, instead of relying solely on US arms sales. This shift signals that Saudi Arabia is looking for more options rather than sticking to its old alliances. Another key reason for the growing distance is energy. In the past, the US depended on Saudi oil, but thanks to increased American oil production, that dependency has decreased. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has found new customers, including China and India, which are becoming more important economic partners. The kingdom has also made moves that have frustrated Washington, like cutting oil production despite US requests to keep prices low. While the US and Saudi Arabia will likely remain strategic partners, the relationship is no longer as strong as it once was. 4. South Korea. South Korea has been one of America's closest allies for decades, but even this strong relationship is showing signs of change. One of the biggest reasons is the shifting security landscape in Asia. While the US has long been the key military protector of South Korea, Seoul is now investing heavily in its own defense. This means South Korea is less reliant on American military support than before. Another major factor is economics. South Korea's economy is deeply connected to both the US and China, and balancing those relationships has become increasingly difficult. China is its largest trading partner, and cutting ties would hurt South Korean businesses. As a result, South Korea is carefully managing its relationship with both superpowers, sometimes making decisions that don't align with American interests. South Korea is also becoming more independent in diplomacy. In the past, it mostly followed the US on major international issues, but now it is pursuing its own foreign policy goals. It is building stronger ties with other Asian nations and playing a bigger role in regional politics. There is growing debate about whether Seoul should rely less on Washington and take a more independent path. 3. Nigeria. Nigeria is Africa's largest economy and one of its most influential countries, but it is steadily reducing its reliance on the US. For years, American businesses, aid, and diplomacy played a big role in Nigeria's development. However, Nigeria is now diversifying its partnerships, looking more toward China, Europe, and other global players for trade and investment. The US is struggling to compete with this level of investment. Another major factor is security. Nigeria has long relied on American military aid to combat terrorism, but frustration has grown over what many see as slow and conditional support. Instead, Nigeria has started buying weapons from other sources, giving it more flexibility. This shift reflects Nigeria's desire to control its own security without heavy dependence on Washington. Culturally and politically, Nigeria is also asserting itself on the global stage. At the same time, anti-American sentiment has been rising, especially among younger Nigerians who see US policies as self-interested rather than mutually beneficial. Nigeria still engages with the US, but it is making it clear that it wants a more equal partnership, not one where America dominates the relationship. 2. Mexico. Mexico and the US have one of the closest relationships in the world, but that doesn't mean it's always smooth. Recently, Mexico has been moving away from America's influence, making decisions that prioritize its own interests. One of the biggest areas of tension is trade. While the U.S. is Mexico's largest trading partner, Mexico has been strengthening economic ties with China and other countries to reduce its dependence on the American market. Another major issue is security. The U.S. has long pressured Mexico to do more to fight drug cartels and illegal migration, but Mexico's government has taken a different approach. Instead of aggressive crackdowns, it has focused on internal reforms and its own security strategies. Politically, Mexico's leadership has become more vocal in standing up to the U.S. Whether it's pushing back on economic policies, resisting American influence in Latin America, or maintaining relations with countries Washington disapproves of, Mexico is asserting itself more than ever. While the U.S. and Mexico remain deeply connected, the relationship is shifting. Mexico is no longer content with being seen as a junior partner, it wants to be treated as an equal, making its own decisions without U.S. interference. 1. Canada. Canada has historically been one of America's closest allies. The two nations share deep economic, cultural, and security ties. But even Canada is pulling away in some key areas. One of the biggest reasons is trade. While Canada still does massive business with the U.S., it is working to diversify its economic relationships. It has signed more trade deals with Europe and Asia to reduce its reliance on the American market. This shift is partly driven by concerns about U.S. trade policies, which have sometimes hurt Canadian industries. Energy is another major factor. Canada is a major oil producer, but U.S. policies on pipelines and environmental regulations have caused tensions. Canada has been looking for new markets for its resources, including Asia. Politically, Canada has also been more willing to challenge the U.S. on global issues. Whether it's climate policy, relations with China, or international trade, Canada is increasingly pursuing its own path rather than simply following Washington's lead. Public opinion reflects this shift as well. While Canadians still see the U.S. as a close partner, many feel that American influence isn't always positive. The two countries will always be neighbors and allies, but Canada is making it clear that it won't always be in America's shadow.